Today I'm starting a series where I do a brief overview of each class and their progression throughout the Classic expansions, from Vanilla, TBC and Wrath, so you can have a good idea of how every class will perform in each expansion. To some extent, I think that these base versions of the game will always have a fan base, and people will want to go back to them, but when you do so, you'll have to answer the ultimate question: which class to play this time around? That could just be for replaying a particular expansion or maybe a longer term project, but your main will be something you'll put countless hours into, so it's important you pick something that really fits you and how you enjoy playing the game. I'll also be rating each class based off the following points: leveling, and that will be for vanilla only, simply because it's a much larger part of the game there. Their PvE performance, so how well they do in raids and dungeons. Will the class be stackable, as in will people want to bring multiple of this? So really, how in demand will the class be? The class's utility in terms of what they bring to a group and how they do in PvP. Open world, that being specific to vanilla again more or less, battlegrounds, and arena. Each one will be rated from 1 to 5, where 1 is poor, 2 below average, 3 average, 4 above average, and 5 amazing. Today we're starting off with the warrior, as it's just always been such a popular pick, and a really straightforward class fantasy. Some people are off over there using magic or ranged weapons, but sometimes you just want to hit stuff with a big weapon. It kinda just works. And for the vanilla version of the game, there's more than enough information out there to have proven time and again just why the warrior is so good at so many areas of the game here. However, the warrior experience doesn't start off that great. The warrior's real weak spot in vanilla has always been the leveling portion of the game, with you often needing to swap weapons to re-level weapon skill, fighting enemies who can be higher levels than you, and just a general lack of gear or a good weapon can all cause problems. Another big reason for the weaker leveling, and later the amazing endgame, is how rage is calculated in vanilla. Unlike later expansions where a set amount of rage is generated per swing, in vanilla, if you deal more damage, you get more rage. This system is great at endgame when you have hit cap, you've got weapon skill, you've got world buffs and consumables, and it's not so great when you're level 12 in Westfall fighting boars. What I will say about warrior leveling though is it's not as bad as it's made out to be, and you can improve things for yourself massively by picking up a good weapon, as well as seeing if you can get world buffs when you're in a city. There's a reason that everyone hypes up the Whirlwind Axe from the warrior class quest. It can carry you from level 30 or so, if you get help picking it up, all the way to the mid 50s, at which point you'll probably start to find better options. A good weapon and world buffs gives you a taste of what this class can do at level 60, and it is a really good time. Before we go on, a quick word from today's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev is a platform that aims to equip you with the skills to forge a career in back-end web development through interactive lessons and learning. And taking on these new concepts is just so much easier when you're engaged and actively have a feeling as though you are progressing towards something. So Boot has brought in tons of features to make learning more interactive and goal-driven, such as experience, achievements, and even leaderboards to keep you motivated to carry on. Boot.dev offers the tools to get fully on board with the Python, Go, and SQL programming languages. It does this through hands-on learning, where you will be writing tons of your own code so that you get a grasp of the fundamentals and understand what it takes to build your own projects in real time. On top of that, all the content is free to view and watch in guest mode, and there is even a 30 days no questions asked refund policy. So even if you're just interested in checking out how Boot works and want to see more before you know if it'll be for you, then you can absolutely do that. So why not check them out? You can go to boot.dev and try their courses for free, and use my code WotLK to get 25% off your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Many thanks as always to boot.dev for the sponsor today. Let's get on back to WoW. For PvE, there's just really no doubt the warrior is the best class in the game for this area, and by some margin at that. A warrior in pre-bis gear can, without exaggeration, out-DPS any hybrid in literal full next Rammus bis. Vanilla just isn't a balanced game whatsoever. Never has been, probably never will be. So if you want to be top DPS, you kind of have to pick warrior. I mean, you're still going to be competing with probably 10 other people playing warrior in every single 40-player raid, but that's how the game is when everybody knows this class is so good. What sets warriors apart, as mentioned earlier, is world buffs, gear optimization, consumables, and so on. Their raid resources scaling make it more or less infinite, and on top of that you have the best DPS cooldowns in the game in Death Wish and Recklessness. Honestly, it's like the game is set up for warrior to just be the best damage dealing class that there is, and that remains true from day one of Molten Core right to your final Naxxramas. On top of that, they're also the best tank in the game, again by quite a large margin. Similar to their DPS, when tanking they also have more or less infinite resources for the best threat generation. They have 3 ways to taunt, where some other tanks don't even have one, between Mocking Blow, Challenging Shout, and just your basic taunt, and they have great cooldowns too with Last Stand, Shield Wall, and a talented shield block. Warriors can also go a Fury prop build where they tank through dual wielding for the best threat generation, and you only put on the shield when bosses are going to hit you hard enough or when you need to use your defensives. If you want to be competitive in PvE in vanilla, either as tank or DPS, warrior really is the go-to pick and something you should absolutely consider, at least if you want to play melee. On top of that, unlike later expansions where you can't stack classes too much due to buff or debuff requirements, for vanilla you can more or less just bring as many warriors as you possibly can fit in a raid because you can take 40 people. It's a weird spot for the game where warrior is simultaneously the most popular class and the most in-demand class. This really never happens. Now, loot competition though, that's its whole other thing of course. Expect problems there. If your raid is half warriors, all of them are going to have the same bis list, and when a boss drops 4 items, you can go for a long time without seeing any upgrades. Warrior's utility isn't to be slept on either when you break it down. They're actually pretty damn good in this regard as well. They have Sunder Armor, Demo Shout, Thunderclap, 3 ways to taunt, the best DPS and defensive cooldowns, AoE Fear, and so on. The class actually packs a lot of utility, and hopefully enough warriors in your raid are pressing Sunder first global so every mob instantly has 5 stacks. Surely this always happens. For PvP and vanilla once again, the warrior is overall amazing, this time more so playing arms than Fury. The big difference maker here is if you are solo or in a group with other players. If you are solo on the warrior, you can get bullied by most of the other classes in the game, to be honest, because they can open on you before you can charge them, and then it's just difficult to close the gap. It's solo where the warrior does feel a little bit weaker for sure. However, apart from leveling or farming, you won't often be solo that much in PvP scenarios, and when you are part of a group on the warrior, similar to how they do in PvE, they instantly become one of the best classes in the game. With their wide toolkit of utility, massive damage, abilities like Mortal Strike to half healing and so on, they're a serious threat in any PvP environment. Overall for vanilla, warrior has a relatively slow start leveling and is generally on the weaker side when played as a solo individual, but for group content they absolutely excel and are among the best classes in the game without a doubt. If you want to top DPS or tank in vanilla, warrior really is a class that you should seriously consider. So I think as a whole it's understandable why so many people keep going back to the warrior for vanilla. Heading through the Dark Portal then into TBC, things are about to change for the warrior. Now in 2021, when we were going from vanilla to TBC for the first time on Classic, people were dooming super hard on warrior, and it was the popular opinion that it went from hero class in vanilla to completely terrible in TBC, well, at least until way later in the expansion, sort of tier 6 and beyond. Realistically though, I mean, I've got the receipts, I've got the logs back from TBC Classic here that we can pull up to see that, in fact, in every single phase, warrior was one of the better DPS classes throughout the whole of TBC. However, rolling warrior isn't a free pass to topping DPS as it was in vanilla, because in TBC, things do change, and the logs here, whilst encouraging for you to stick with warrior, really don't tell the full story. First is that there is a lot more competition from other classes in terms of the damage, most notably from Warlock and Hunter, though many other classes have power spikes at different points throughout the expansion. Second is that you're going to need more than just pre-bis to really do well. In fact, you're going to need a lot of bis, and that seriously contested gear is still very difficult to get. Third is that you're going to need an ideal group setup with an enhance and a feral druid to boost your damage. Fourth is that you're going to need to play Fury instead of Arms to do the most damage, meaning you won't bring Blood Frenzy, which is a 4% physical damage taken debuff on your target, and your raid leader might not be too enthusiastic about that decision, at least early in the expansion. So yes, warrior DPS does remain good, but you really have to set it up for success. Yes, this is true in general for DPS in TBC, but warriors, I reckon, do have to go the extra mile here. You should also know that there is a dual wield arms build as well, which I think will be a popular pick early into the expansion when you have less gear, because it will allow you to put up the Blood Frenzy debuff and get used to playing dual wield before going Fury later down the line for the big damage. Of course, as per usual, and as the expansion progresses, warrior only gets better, and by tier 6 and beyond, which is Black Temple, Mount Hyjal and beyond, they again feel super powerful and are capable of being up there at the top of DPS meters. And if you manage to get Warglaives, I mean, that's just even better really, but not something which everyone can count on doing. As for their tanking identity, I think they fall off compared to vanilla, where they were clearly the best, with Feral Druid overtaking them on single target threat and Paladin on AoE. When leveling or in dungeons, you're going to be working overtime on AoE threat, as this class just doesn't do too well in this area, but they make up for it with solid single target threat and good defensive cooldowns, albeit they're still on kind of a long cooldown for what they do. Things just hit harder in TBC on average compared to vanilla, so you're going to be rotating through those cooldowns pretty often. Really though, the big thing I want to mention here is about threat generation. As a tank, the last thing you want is for your DPS to be threat capped and having to stop what they're doing so you can catch back up. And again, similar to what we did with DPS, we can check the passes logged throughout TBC Classic, and we can see that warrior started as one of the more popular picks, and by the end of the expansion it was the least popular one, which I think reflects people swapping to druid or paladin. Also, unlike vanilla, warrior really isn't all that stackable in TBC. Yes, there were speedruns done by majority warrior raids in TBC, I'm sure I will see comments about it, but I don't even want to think about how many split runs were required to make that possible, let alone the group compositions that will be required for this to work. This just isn't a realistic way for your average guild to raid. In fact, I think a lot of people who got scared off for the warrior at the start of TBC in 2021 because they thought it was going to be bad, will stick with it for TBC on anniversary, because we know now that they actually do pretty well overall, but the warrior raid spots will become way more limited and far less in demand compared to vanilla. So I'd say if you want to stick with your warrior and play this as a damage dealer above all, you really want to be with a guild for that consistent raid spot, and that if you're pugging, it's probably not going to be the best. Warrior utility also hasn't changed a ton since vanilla, but other classes just bring so much more stuff now, so they just don't feel as good as they used to be. Your big selling points are really Battle Shout and Blood Frenzy as an arms warrior, but ideally you do want to be going Fury eventually because it just does a lot more damage, so you don't want Blood Frenzy to be the only reason you're brought to raids forever. For PvP, we're really just focused on Arena and Battlegrounds by TBC, since with open world PvP everyone can just fly off on a mount, so it kind of stopped being a thing. And here the arms warrior is honestly in an even better spot than they already were in vanilla, but for mainly the same reasons, such as their very high damage and Mortal Strike for the 50% heal reduction. Warrior is a core part of a ton of very popular comps in both 2s and 3s, so if PvP is your focus, warrior is a great pick here. Overall for warrior in TBC, it really isn't as bad as it was made out to be on our first re-release in 2021. They are consistently a good DPS class throughout the expansion and only get better as time goes on. They don't perform as well as they did in vanilla as tank, with both druid and paladin being better for threat generation, but people still cleared all content on the warrior of course. Warriors also remain a powerhouse for PvP focused players too. The big change is that half your raid really can't be a warrior anymore as it was in vanilla, and TBC raid comps really aren't that flexible due to group-wide buffs, so I would ideally look to play with a guild as this class, as I don't think the pug world will be very fun. Now we have Wrath of the Lich King, the culmination of the Classic Trilogy, and a huge time for change. With Wrath, the Doomsayers were absolutely right about the state of warrior early in the expansion. Wow, they were bad. Like, really bad. Let's just pull up the logs and laugh at them for a bit. Yep, there's Warrior all the way down at the bottom of the meters for once. It's kind of what people were predicting in TBC, except this time it came true. The thing is though, Warrior's AoE damage was actually not bad if you were arms with Blade Storm now in the game, but either playing arms or Fury, this class basically just had no resources and did no single target damage, which is, you know, a bit of a problem. The issue is with the level cap being increased, more secondary stats are needed to raise important bonuses, such as crit chance or armor penetration, and with early gear, Warriors just really didn't have that many secondary stats, meaning overall they felt weak. It's their classic issue of being kind of bad at the start of the expansion and then scaling well, very similar to Fire Mage or other classes which are heavily reliant on crit. The Warrior continued to be subpar into the Ulduar phase of the game as well, having similar issues to what they saw in Tier 7, but as is often the case with Warrior, scaling began to kick in during Trial of the Grand Crusader, and the class finally started to show signs of life, and by the time we were in ICC, Warrior had risen all the way to being one of the top DPS classes in the game. Of course, also there was Shadowmourne, and getting what is more or less a guarantee legendary and one of the most powerful weapons ever in WoW is going to help you on damage meters quite a bit. As for tanking, it's kind of a similar story to how things were in TBC in terms of the Protection Warrior's popularity, with them overall being the least represented tank for the expansion. The thing was, in Wrath, Prot Warrior did good threat now, their AoE damage was actually crazy, no one was beating a Prot Warrior in a dungeon, but their defensive toolkit just wasn't very good. And in Wrath, by the time we're in Ulduar and beyond, bosses just kind of start doing a lot of damage to your tanks. Well, some of them do anyway. On top of that, Protection Paladin was just straight up way overpowered in Wrath. I mean, it was a tank that had cheat death passively on a 2-minute cooldown. I don't know who at Blizzard thought that was okay, but there we go. And also the new tank in Blood DK was pretty amazing too. Warriors on average would just be taking more damage, and their damage intake was more unpredictable compared to other tanks that were in the game, which led to them being a less than popular pick. In terms of stacking this class, I mean, we saw how Warrior was doing at the start compared to the end of Wrath before, so I feel as though that kind of answers the question right there. Basically, no early game, and yes, you can do late game, and how much demand for this class overall there will be will really match how far progressed Wrath as an expansion is. Unless you are Prot, where, to be honest, I know people can make it work and have done, but given its reputation and how it performs, it just won't be a spec that people are actively looking for all that much. I do expect a sudden influx of warriors just to begin to appear towards the mid to end of Trial of the Grand Crusader preparing for ICC, as well as those people who just want to pick up a Shadowmourne and play with that weapon too. But if warrior's just your class and you always play it, it is fine to have them in a raid early on for their debuffs and buffs, just don't expect to be performing too well. For PvP though, things remain as good as ever. In fact, I'd say that again they improved somehow, as now you can charge in combat in Wrath, and you have Blade Storm, which is a combined massive amount of damage and CC immunity. No heroic leap though in Wrath, unfortunately, that was Cataclysm, but apart from that, Warrior is again a very popular pick across all PvP brackets. Notably for Wrath 2, PvE gear remains very good in PvP, especially trinkets and weapons, or essentially things which give you a ton of armor penetration. So in other words, you better like both PvP and PvE in Wrath to get the most out of your warrior in Arena. Overall for Wrath, Protection is still a less than popular pick, really because of how overpowered Protection Paladin is, and Blood DK often taking the off-tank role. For DPS, you absolutely start weak in tiers 7 and 8, but by tiers 9 and 10 you start to rapidly ascend up the DPS meters, and can end up as a top performer by the end of the expansion. So really set your expectations of the class to match that, both in terms of damage and demand for the warrior in raids. Warrior is always a great choice for PvP though throughout the whole expansion, and that is a brief rundown of the warrior throughout the entire Classic Trilogy. A very strong DPS pick throughout, and a solid tank, albeit they fall off a bit more in this area of gameplay. Warrior absolutely peaked in vanilla though. It's just hard to beat that feeling of infinite resources and the massive damage this class could do back then. I will of course be working my way through all the classes and specs effects with this series, so if you like the series and can't wait to see your class, drop a like, a comment and all that good stuff for the YouTube algorithm. Let me know your experiences with the warrior over the Classic Trilogy, and whether you're planning to give this class another go in any upcoming re-releases as well. Shout out once again to boot.dev for sponsoring this video. You can check them out for free via the links below and get started on backend web development today. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all in the next one very soon.